As the Washington Commanders continue to build their 2025 roster, one big question remains with plenty of options for how to fill in for Sam Cosmi while securing the future of the offensive line at the same time. That and more on this mailbag episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome inside today's episode of Locked On Commanders. I'm your host, David Harrison, here with you every Monday through Friday. Your friend, your eyes, your ears on the ground, covering the Washington Commanders for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com. Also helping out with WUSA9.com's local coverage of the team. I want to thank you for coming through for this mailbag episode. We're going to be answering a couple of questions, well, a few, 4 or 5 or so questions, largely pertaining to the running back position, the future of the running back position, including the futures of Brian Robinson Jr., Austin Ekeler, the NFL draft, and other players on the roster. But we're going to start it all off by talking about the offensive line. Sam Cosmi dealing with his injury, going through his progression of his recovery. Who is going to step up? What are the best options to step up for him while he continues his recovery? And is it Brandon Coleman? Every day, or those of you who come through every single day, I want to thank you for coming through again for this episode. If you're not already, please subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to today's show. If you're new to the show, I want to thank you for coming through, for finding the show. Hopefully you like what you hear, what you see, and you come back around again very, very soon. Locked On Commanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, is a daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders. So make sure you come back again. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers, you can get $200 in bonus bets with your first $5 bet if that first $5 bet wins. Decided to turn over the mailbag, or open up the mailbag. We didn't have a mailbag last week because of all the free agent activity. Wanted to make sure we were staying as up to date as possible with everything going on around those contracts and agreements and all that. So I wanted to open up the mailbag a little bit earlier here this week. We're going to have 2 mailbag episodes actually today, and our next episode will both be mailbag episodes to make sure that we get as many questions out there as possible and as many answers as we can possibly do at this point in the offseason. We're going to start it all off talking about the offensive line, and this one actually comes back from a little bit before the free agent period, but Dr. Wonderful asked, with so much talk about moving Brandon Coleman, possibly to guard, but specifically to right tackle, how hard is it to move from the left to the right? Your feet step differently. Most folks are not ambidextrous. With Coleman taking all snaps at left tackle last season, how hard might it slide to the right tackle spot be? It's a very relevant question. It was a relevant question when it was originally asked. It's a relevant question here post free agency, because Laramie Tunsil is obviously coming in here to be the new left tackle for the Washington Commanders. They didn't trade all that draft capital, bring in a guy who's going to get paid as much as he is and as established as he is to make him move to right tackle, right? Laramie Tunsil is going to be your left tackle. So Brandon Coleman is going to be moving. And you know, I've heard other people talk about, well, Coleman maybe was projected to be a guard entering the NFL, which he was. And so he should move back inside to guard. Now, usually people are talking about him moving to left guard, taking Nick Allegretti's spot. We'll talk about that here in just a little bit, and because it pairs with the topic I've gotten from multiple insiders here this week, asking who the best candidate is to fill in for Sam Cosmi. So we've got the Brandon Coleman move, and we've got the fill in for Sam Cosmi. We're going to kind of combine the two into one conversation here to start off the mailbag. And I want to go back actually to 2020, if we could, the year that Tristan Wirfs was drafted out of Iowa to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Right tackle was the position he was drafted to play, and he was asked about moving from left to right because he had played right tackle, played left tackle at Iowa, was playing right tackle in the NFL. And Tristan in 2020 said, quote, "When I first started flipping back and forth, I think I was trying to look for a big difference. Honestly, the only thing different is you have your other hand down. It just feels awkward at first, but once you settle in, it feels fine. It kind of feels like wiping your butt with your other hand. It just feels a little awkward at first, but you get used to it." End quote. Now, kind of a gross statement there from Tristan, right? Kind of a gross projection of kind of how it really is to make this move, but I think it's also fairly accurate. Now, listen, I'm gonna tell you right now, I did not go, and I'm not gonna go test his theory of what it's like to wipe your butt with the opposite hand, but you can imagine that if you had to, for whatever reason, it would be a little bit difficult at first, a little weird. You're going to get the job done, and eventually it's just going to kind of become how you do it, right? So I think the analogy tracks. I think it makes sense. Now, Tristan Wirfs played right tackle for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers originally during their Super Bowl year as well. Eventually, he moved to the left side. Now, they told him they were going to move him to the left side early that offseason before they made that change. Now, given how general manager Adam Peters has pursued the left tackle position this offseason, right? They were wanting to get in on the Ronnie Stanley conversations, prepared to pay him about $4 million more than the Baltimore Ravens are paying him to take him away from Baltimore. They were in on the Dan Moore left tackle conversations. Obviously, they were in on the Laramie Tunsil conversation because they ended up drafting for Laramie Tunsil. So basically, you can look at this situation this offseason and say Adam Peters went into this offseason 100% dead set. I'm getting me a new left tackle. As much as that has to do with Brandon. Look, Brandon didn't do terrible for a third-round first-year left tackle, but he looked like a third-round first-year left tackle, right? Needed some help. There were a lot of chip blocks over there. Jaden Daniels obviously helped him out. But given how determined AP was to go get a new left tackle for Jaden Daniels, probably pretty safe bet to think that Brandon Coleman has been working on moving over to the right side probably this entire offseason, been moving on getting his kickouts right from the right side, all that kind of stuff. If he wasn't before, certainly as soon as the trade was agreed to, because, again, the trade was agreed to, wasn't actually finalized, but I had a team source confirming to me that the trade was agreed to. So if they're willing to tell the media that this trade is happening, they're going to tell their other tackle that the trade is happening. So Brandon Coleman, one way or another, has been prepping to move to the right side for either the last couple of weeks or the last couple of months, depending on when they officially told him, hey, dude, you're probably moving to the right side. So that's plenty of time, right? From now to July to August and into training camp to the season. That's plenty of time for Brandon Coleman to get back acclimated to playing the right side of the line. Because remember, he also had right tackle reps in college. So this isn't going to be the first time Brandon Coleman played right tackle. And if memory serves correctly, I'm pretty sure he got right tackle reps during either rookie minicamp, OTAs, or even maybe the early parts of training camp. Don't quote me on when, but I do vaguely remember he took right tackle reps for the Washington Commanders, not in a game, but just in practice and stuff like that. So again, it's something that he's going to have the opportunity to adjust for. Now, as far as guard, I would say that Brandon Coleman is more of a Sam Cosmi type of guy than he is a Nick Allegretti type of guy, meaning that while he's a little bit lighter on his feet than Sam Cosmi is, I don't think he's as nimble as Allegretti. Typically, teams like to have their more athletic guard on the blind side, which would be where Nick Allegretti is lined up, left guard, and more of your mauler type on the right, which is where Sam Cosmi is on the right. So a move to guard would only really make sense if Brandon Coleman was going to right guard. Obviously, he's not going to replace Sam Cosmi, right? So if he's not going to replace Sam Cosmi, doesn't make a whole lot of sense for the future of Brandon Coleman to first put him in at right guard, then when Sam is healthy, move him out to right tackle. I mean, I'm not saying you can't do it and can't have success with it. I'm just saying the more clearly obvious path to success for Brandon Coleman and the line is to put Brandon Coleman at right tackle from Jump Street and to find somebody else to fill in for Sam Cosmi while he's healing. So that, to me, makes the most sense. Brandon Coleman moving to right tackle, and then you look to Andrew Wiley most likely getting first crack at filling in at right guard. He's played guard in the NFL. He did it for the Kansas City Chiefs. I actually talked to him late last year about a hypothetical situation. Hey, if the team asked you to move back inside the guard, how would you feel about it? He said, yeah, I'll do it. I'll do whatever the team needs me to do. Restructure his contract to get some more guaranteed money this season. Overall, might end up getting paid a little bit less. But Andrew Wiley, on the record, willing to move back inside the guard if that is what the Commanders want him to do. Of course, Trent Scott is back now. And if Wiley is the guard while Cosmi is injured, then Trent Scott becomes your swing tackle. If Trent Scott is your guard, he filled in for Sam Cosmi while he was injured in the postseason, then Andrew Wiley is your swing tackle. Either way, when Sam Cosmi comes back, you've got really good depth in Trent Scott and Andrew Wiley, and perhaps Nate Herbig, if he's good enough, can get in the conversation here as well. So I think either one of those three options is probably your best bet to fill in for Sam Cosmi. And if you want left guard competition, you're probably going to go get it somewhere in the NFL draft. AP told me at the NFL Scouting Combine that Cosmi's injury doesn't largely impact the strategy for this offseason. And that, to me, appears to be because they have two options to fill in for him right now while he's out, Andrew Wiley and Trent Scott, maybe a third in Nick Herbig if he can outperform the other two. And if you're looking for a Nick Allegretti challenger, most likely you're looking at the draft. Just make sure he's a good He's got good pull ability and agility to take on stunts and twists that teams usually like to bring to the quarterback's blind side. Because again, that's typically who your left guard, your blind side guard, I should say, is going to be. So that's how we're going to get this mailbag conversation started. Coming up next, we're actually going to flip the page, not from the offensive side to the defensive side, but a little bit back from the offensive line to the running back room. How does the NFL draft potentially impact what will happen with the Washington Commanders running back group? That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you in part by FanDuel. Of course, we are in the middle of March, which means March Madness is here, and FanDuel is going to give you the chance to take on the action or get in on the action more than ever before. Right now, new customers to FanDuel, you can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, even who's cutting down the nets. And look, if you're not into college basketball, any other sport that's going on right now, you can probably find lines on FanDuel. And again, that $5 bet deal to get the $200 in bonus bets applies to every first $5 bet, not just NCAA $5 bets. However, if you are into March Madness, Duke is your current favorite, plus 290 odds to win the whole thing in the men's bracket. Your Final Four looks like it's going to shape out to be Florida, Auburn, and Houston after Duke. Florida has the second best favorites to win the whole thing. Auburn has the third best odds, and Houston has the fourth best odds at plus 600. The next best odds after Houston at plus 600, Alabama at plus 1900. So pretty big margin there, according to the odds makers, on what's going to happen during March Madness. So go to FanDuel.com, get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Continuing now, today's episode of Locked On Commanders, a mailbag episode here following the first wave of free agency into the offseason. We're about a month and a month and 10 days or so from the NFL draft. So things are going to start getting a little bit tighter. Projections are going to start getting a little bit more reliable. Mock drafts are going to start getting a little bit more informed as we go through this whole thing. So next question comes up from Insider Bill. What is your current best guess for the 29th pick? He presents some options: offensive line, D-line, defensive back, or a trade up or a trade down. So if I'm trying to guess what Adam Peters is probably going to do, that's kind of a hard thing to do, right? AP has pretty much proven that he's not necessarily going after the biggest name, the blue chip guy. He's going to go after the best commander, right? That's what they always kind of keep talking about, is we're looking for commanders, guys that are going to fit the mold, fit the mentality that this team is trying to put onto the field. So best guess of what Adam Peters might do, I think as far as the obvious needs, right? Edge, defensive tackle are up there. So D-line is kind of obviously a clear possibility there. Cornerback is a lesser need, in my opinion, than it is to some people out there, but there aren't a ton of them in this year's class either. So when you look at what the Commanders covet in a player and in a cornerback, outside of Trey Amos from Ole Miss or Azariah Thomas out of Florida State right now, I don't really see a number 29 worthy corner on the board. And of course, I'm saying on the board because there are guys who are going to potentially get drafted near the top of this class that would certainly fit the bill. But outside of those top 3 or 4 cornerback options, I'm not really sure there's a guy that really fits. And in our mock drafts this year, usually by the time we come on the board, the corners that might fit aren't there anymore, and we're too early to pick one of those other corners that might be able to fit in there. So either they can't play press, they can't tackle very well, or maybe sometimes a combination of both. So that's kind of the situation there. Offensive line is possible, but not at tackle, right? I just think that if you want to give Brandon Coleman a real shot to be your future right tackle as a starter, you're not going to go out there and draft a first-round right tackle. Laramie Tunsil is obviously here now. He's got a couple years left on his contract. Perhaps an extension is in the works. I don't know, but we talked to him on Monday, and he clearly is in the intention rather of keeping his career healthy, keeping his play up there, kind of like a Trent Williams does for the next 5 or 6 years. So if that's the case, you don't need to go after a left tackle that early as well. And I do believe that they want to give Brandon Coleman an opportunity. You're not drafting a right guard in the first round because, of course, Sam Cosmi is coming back. Tyler Biotish seems to be cemented pretty well. So a left guard, if available, that really kind of fits that commander mold and does all those things, maybe. But remember, not only did not Nick Allegretti not grade poorly, right? Didn't grade great, right? He wasn't, blues and greens across the board on Pro Football Focus, but he also wasn't in the reds, right? He was kind of right there in the middle. So very solid left guard from a functional standpoint. But not only that, He was also the guy that if you go back to when Tyler Biadasz had to miss time, the first game that Tyler Biadasz missed time, Michael Dieter, who stepped up to be the center in place of him, also set the protections. Didn't go very well. The next time Tyler Biadasz had to miss time, Michael Dieter stepped up to play center, but it was Nick Allegretti that set the protection. So not only is Nick Allegretti a solid left guard for this team, he's also obviously one of the guys they trust to set the protections most when Tyler Biadasz is not in there. Now, obviously, you hope Tyler Biadasz is always going to be in there, but it is what it is. So if Allegretti's on the bench, probably means you need to at least make him your backup center. So those are kind of the situations that I look in there. Trading up certainly is a possibility. You know, there kind of seems to be this overall thought process that in this year's draft, it's very top heavy. First 15 or 16 picks are where you're really going to get your best value. After that, there's kind of this big gap of guys who in a lot of drafts would honestly be viewed as either very late day one guys or early day two guys. And of course, with the Commanders drafting 29th overall, that kind of fits, but you're going to start getting the top end of that late first round talent taken off the board before you get to the 29th. By the time you get to the 29th pick, you may be looking at guys who typically would be looked at as day two options versus day one options. So trading up, I don't know how likely that is. Again, we'll see if, you know, you never know when a player starts to slide and the Commanders decide to jump up and go make a move there. Trading back, I think, is much more likely, obviously, than trading up because of those exact reasons. Plus, it allows Adam Peters the potential opportunity to go out there and recoup some picks. Now, speaking of 29th pick and speaking of the future of this roster, Steven asked, should this team be satisfied with the current running back room with Brian Robinson Jr. leading the way? So, Brian Robinson Jr., Austin Ekeler, this season, if you are going to run with Brian Robinson Jr. and Austin Ekeler as your top two backs this season, personally, I'm okay with that. I think they're very good backs. I think you can do a lot of good things with them. You bring in Deebo Samuel, Noah Brown's coming back, Luke McCaffrey hopefully takes a step, Zach Ertz is back, John Bates is back, Benson, right? You got all these other weapons. We don't need the running backs to be, you know, Christian McCaffrey in his prime, Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery in Detroit. You would love to have it, don't get me wrong, but can you win? Can you survive, or however you want to put it, with B-Rob and Austin Ekeler? Yeah, I mean, you made it to the NFC Championship game with them, so of course you can. Right now, the question really, I think, needs to evolve into: are you so satisfied with these two that you start looking at them and say, "Look, we're going to get something done to where 2026, this is our same running back tandem." And I don't think you can necessarily go there right now. Brian Robinson Jr. projected by Spot Track to be worth $8.3 million per year on his next contract on a new 4-year deal. His contract expires after the 2025 NFL season. So does Austin Ekeler. So both of these guys that are leading your running back room are playing on expiring contracts. B-Rob's projected contract would tie him for the 11th most in the NFL on annual average value right now. Since he was drafted, and among running backs with at least 500 carries, there are only 25 of those guys, by the way. He ranks 18th in carries, 23rd in yards, 21st in yards per carry, 19th in touchdowns, 13th in first downs, and 13th in success rate. That averages out to him being about the 17th best back since he entered the NFL. Very good for, especially for a third-round draft pick. The 17th best AAV, annual average value, for a running back contract right now belongs to Bijan Robinson at $5.49 million per year. Nearly $3 million less per year than Spot Track estimates Brian Robinson Jr. might be able to get on the open market. So unless B-Rob is willing to take about a $3 million pay cut, according to his valuation, I don't know that they're going to be able to get a deal done, and I don't know the Commanders should overpay to keep Brian Robinson Jr. in his current state. Now, if he comes out there and balls out, we've seen this before, contract year, dude balls out, maybe he gets paid. Now, of course, Bijan's also on his rookie deal, which could kind of show you that maybe you can get this kind of production from a rookie or an older veteran. Speaking of older veterans, Ekeler has 460 carries in the same stretch that we talked about with B-Rob, 2022 to now. Among the 36 running backs in the league that have had 400 or more carries, Ekeler ranks where he averages you about the 25th best running back in that span. Not bad at all. That's about $3 million per year in annual average value. So if you can get them both back for $9 million or less, then great. But if Brian Robinson Jr. goes out there looking for his $8.3 million per year by himself, you can't literally sign Austin Ekeler for $700,000 a year, which means you're going to need to go somewhere else for at least one of these running backs, if not both of these running backs, which means if you're Adam Peters and the Washington Commanders, you either need to be working on extensions right now to lock these guys in for 2026 and maybe beyond, or you need to start working on contingency plans. That's where the possibility of a running back at number 29 comes in. And that's where we'll pick things up coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Wrapping up today's mailbag episode of Locked On Commanders live here on YouTube. Appreciate everybody coming through for the live. If you're watching later, if you're listening later, appreciate you as well. Everydayers, of course. Special thank you to you for coming through every single day. Picking it back up here, start talking about the running back situation. Look, I like Brian Robinson Jr. I like Austin Ekeler for 2025. I'm not going to be mad if that's the top two running backs on this roster. However, both of them have expiring contracts. We talked about some of those contract figures just a second ago. Because of those potential figures and what it might mean for a young running back in B-Rob who might go out there trying to look for a payday, a veteran running back in Austin Ekeler who could potentially return, could potentially not return. At 29, is there a running back available that I personally would say the Washington Commanders should take seriously and consider drafting? That question came from Insider Tia. I would say there are two. There are two running backs in this year's draft that if they're there at number 29, the Washington Commanders have to take a serious beat and decide if they need to go ahead and draft one of these guys. Those guys are Ashton Jeanty out of Boise State and Omarion Hampton out of North Carolina. They're the only two running backs right now at number 29 that I would say that the Washington Commanders need to take a serious look at if they are there. Now, Jeanty is currently going top 10 in mock drafts on average, according to Mock Draft Database. Hampton is going in the early 20s. So we kind of go back to that previous question. Outside of a trade up, you may not be getting your opportunity to draft either of these guys. Outside of that, right now, it doesn't seem like either of them would be there. After that, I got to say there's not, you know what I mean? I'm an Arizona State guy, so obviously I'm a Cam Scatteraboo guy. From a fan perspective, from a scheme perspective, I do think that there's a fit here in the offense, but not at number 29. Quidshawn Junkins out of Ohio State. Travion Henderson out of Ohio State. Again, guys that I'm a fan of their team. I'm a fan of their game. Not at number 29. And pretty much go Jaden Blue. There's a lot of other guys out there. Now, we do know the Commanders met formally with Ashton Jeanty at the NFL Scouting Combine. And a lot of people took that to mean they are interested in potentially moving up to get him because they're going to have to move up if they want to get him. Now, that's certainly possible, right? But don't forget that it also isn't necessarily that we're so impassioned with you that we're going to talk to you and we're going to possibly move up for you. It also just could indicate that they simply need to know more about him. They don't know XYZ about him, so they want to go find out. Remember, Dan Quinn told us at the Scouting Combine, one of the biggest things he takes value out of that week is finding out these players why. Why is it they do what they do? Why is it they want to play professional football? Why is it they want to do those things? If you don't know that about a guy like Ashton Jeanty, you go out there and you find it out. You have that formal meeting in Indianapolis to get to the bottom of it. So it could mean that they're incredibly interested in him. It could also mean that they just didn't know if they were incredibly interested and wanted to do their homework. So I wouldn't read too much into any of these visits, any of these formal meetings, all this stuff. Just take it with a grain of salt because it can mean any number of things. Now, my concerns about Jeanty are basically ball security. 9 fumbles in the past 2 seasons is way too much for a guy whose literal first job is to carry the football, especially when you remember he's playing a college schedule. He's not playing a full NFL schedule. So that's 9 fumbles in 26 games the last 2 years, which averages out to 5.9 fumbles per 17 games. If your number one pick running back, your first pick that you make in the NFL draft as a running back, fumbles the ball 5 or 6 times, even as a rookie, how are you going to feel about that? That's the question you got to answer. Players that fumble that much, typically in the quarterback range. So if you're talking about a combination of muff snaps, mishandled handoffs, and actual fumbles for a quarterback, you tend to get those numbers pretty high up there. 5 to 6 fumbles for a rookie, there's no guarantee that he would actually fumble that much, but remember the college game also, he's going up against a lot of defenses, against guys who likely aren't even going to make it to the XFL or the USFL, right? Like these aren't NFL talented players on the other side of the ball. Now you're playing up against NFL defenders who have NFL coaching, right? You also get NFL coaching, there's just a lot of assumption there. We're going to assume that we're going to be able to make him secure the ball a little bit better, things like that. At 29, pick number 29, he's got enough physical tools that I can roll the dice and be a little bit more comfortable than I would if I were in the top 10. Just put it that way. Hampton's another good prospect, good mix of size and power, better receiver than Ashton Jeanty, though this offense, at least from 1 year sample size, doesn't really need that or lean on that all that much. He can pass block, so he could be a three down back, which is basically a prerequisite for being a first-round running back, if you ask me. Personally, Hampton has less risk than Jeanty, but Jeanty has the higher upside, right? If you can fix his ball security and make him a better receiver, or if Jeanty just is a better receiver than we saw at Boise State, then Jeanty has a ton of upside. Hampton has really good upside as well. For my reputation, right, if I'm a young GM in my second year in the first round, I'm probably targeting Hampton, which is why if I'm a GM that needs a running back and Jeanty is there, then Hampton's probably there. I get on the clock. I'm probably trying to trade back, get some picks for somebody, and then maybe somebody else takes Jeanty. I can take Hampton and then go to my press conference and say, darn it. Look, we got one of our top 2 guys, and just kind of roll with it too. So good question there. Now, Joy comes through and wants to talk about another running back. Joy says, I try to immerse myself in all things Commanders. What is it going to take for fans and coaches to pay attention to the gem of a player we already have? That is Chris Rodriguez. In my humble opinion, I would love to see him play more next year. When he did have the opportunity to get the ball, he did amazing. Yeah, so Joy, Chris Rodriguez, everydayers who have been watching this show or listening to this show for a little while now know that I'm a Chris Rodriguez guy. I feel like Chris Rodriguez is a guy whose potential has not been fully tapped into yet by the team, but also by himself. I think he's a better receiver than he gets credit for coming out of Kentucky. He agrees that he's a better receiver than he got credit for coming out of Kentucky as well, for what it's worth. Has 1 career catch right now. You know what I mean? But look, you're right. Like, the dude, when he gets on the field and he gets the opportunity, he balls. You know what I mean? We talked about this a little while early in the offseason. Chris, from among running backs that came in the NFL the same time he did, Chris is like, he's like top 10 or top 15, I want to say, in yards per carry, right? He just doesn't have a lot of attempts, right? So again, he's done a great job every time he gets in there, much more of a gamer than he is a practice guy. Look, the bottom line truth of the matter is, last year we came into training camp, and those of us who knew him had him 3rd on the running back depth chart behind Brian Robinson Jr., Austin Ekeler. Jeremy McNichols was 4th. The fact of the matter is, Jeremy McNichols is a Anthony Lynn guy. Anthony Lynn is the run game coordinator for this team. He's an Anthony Lynn guy. So he has that little bit of an edge over Chris Rodriguez. Then during the course of training camp, McNichols just outperformed Chris Rodriguez. And that's why McNichols ended up the 3rd back. Chris Rodriguez ended up the 4th back on the practice squad, brought up during injuries and all that stuff. But like you said, Chris did a really good job. So I don't know that anybody's necessarily sleeping on him, because look, at the end of the day, man, these coaches have to go off of what they see on a day-to-day basis. On a day-to-day basis, Jeremy McNichols looks like the guy that's going to help you win more than Chris Rodriguez does. That's the decision they're going to make. So Chris, and he knows this. This isn't me talking out one side of my body or in the other. Chris knows. And when we've had these conversations, I'm not going to get into details, but in this year's training camp, like, Chris Rodriguez is going to have another opportunity to go up there and compete against Jeremy McNichols, with Jeremy McNichols to be that 3rd back. We'll see what happens in the NFL draft. You know what I mean? That's obviously going to have a big impact on this conversation as well. But if Chris can come out there in training camp this year and ball out and show really good stuff that we see in the games, then that conversation could potentially be had. But yeah, Joy, I'm happy to hear that you're a Chris Rodriguez person. I know there's other people out there who are big on Chris Rodriguez as well. I got a lot of questions during the course of the season, man, that said, why can't Chris Rodriguez get on the field? I'm with you guys. But some of that is in Chris Rodriguez's hands as well. So that's how we're going to wrap up this very running back heavy, but also offensive line focused mailbag. I want to appreciate everybody who sent in those questions from the insider group. If you want to submit your question for future mailbags, all you have to do is become a Locked On Commanders insider. Join subtext.com/LockedOnCommanders to get in on that and so much more that goes beyond the regular show every single day here. In the meantime, make sure you're checking out the Locked On NFL Draft podcast with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this very episode. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day. Thanks for coming through on a regular basis like you do. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I'll see you right back here next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.